in Syracuse, and Billy, I mean, she's done.
Welcome. We'll get started in just a moment.
I mean, in her mind.
Yes.
And they were really, really nice to her, she said. They were really good. So that's, at least all three of them are better.
Yep, that has helped a lot too.
Yeah. Welcome to this. I invite you. I think there's
I just thought, I gotta call Mary Margaret.
No, I don't feel any better about it than you do, but I keep thinking, oh, she's
welcome to the space, everyone.
She's put every bit of her time.
Right. Good evening. We are thrilled. We're expecting a full house tonight, so come on in. As you're coming in, won't you let me know where you're joining from? What city, what town? If you're from a particular organization, we always love to welcome folks and know who's in the room.
Brooklyn, New York.
All right, Brooklyn. I'm Bed-Stuy, so I love to see Brooklyn. What part of Brooklyn?
Audio now unmuted.
Next door to Bed-Stuy.
I love it. Weeksville has a beautiful heritage center. Who else? Who do we have in the room? Where are folks?
Concord, New Hampshire.
What'd you say?
Concord, New Hampshire.
Oh, Concord, New Hampshire is beautiful. I have actually been there. I tend to try to get that direction for foliage season, which is basically about now. I usually do Vermont and Portland, Maine, but I've done Concord as well. Welcome, folks. We're expecting a full room today, so just want to create space for each of us to either say in the chat or come off mute to let us know where you're coming in from. We are thrilled to have you. This is our October speaker series here at TIDEL. All right, so we've got New Hampshire, we've got Brooklyn, which Brooklyn is always in the house. We know our guest is hailing from the West Coast. Oh, some other folks on the West Coast, Spokane, Washington. I see you. Los Angeles, great. Some of our colleagues from right here at Union, Maggie from the Center for Earth Ethics, St. Louis. This is great. We are spanning the nation quite literally. Richmond, wonderful. Clint, I see your question. Yes, this conversation will be archived on our YouTube page, so you will be able to catch whatever you miss when you depart. My pleasure. All right, let's get going. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome each of you to our space for our TIDEL speaker series. And I am going to invite my colleague David just to say a few words of welcome and hellos. He and I work together at the TIDEL Center, and then we will introduce our speaker and get right into the reason why we have all gathered for today. So go ahead, David.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Really excited for this conversation. The goal of the TIDEL Speaker Series is really to reach out, engage folks who are interested in the work of TIDEL, but for whatever reason can't engage in some of our other things like the fellowship program. And then really to provide forums for the topics of the day and to engage all kinds of experts, as well as the folks working in the field in these types of conversations. So thanks for joining, and looking forward to seeing you all in the chat, and I'll probably be chatting away as well.
Wonderful. I'm wondering, do we have any TIDEL, either current or past fellows in the chat? That is often the case, and whenever they're in the room, we like to shout them out. If you are here or on your way, or when they get here. I see Karen, Dr. K, one of our fellows is here. If you are a current or past TIDEL fellow, just say something in the chat. Let them know you're represented, because we love it when you all are in the space. Okay. All right. Well, without further ado, want to go ahead and get to the main event. You all, I am so thrilled and honored to welcome our guest for today. I met Dr. Philip Butler last spring. Now, it's It's been about a year. And we were gathered together at the Library of Congress. I was attending on behalf of Union Theological Seminary. Dr. Sylvester Johnson had brought us all together, and Philip was there on behalf of
And
Iliff.
then for the
And we were a
ambient
group.
Sandy,
I'm
we can
gonna
just, I'll
invite
just assume.
someone to
Yeah.
mute. Let's see who that is. Okay. But we were a group of folks doing innovation work, and Sylvester joined us because we were having conversations about artificial intelligence. And so there were probably about 35 or so leaders who were literally in a roundtable space. And we were just advancing conversation among ourselves. The goal of the conversation was literally just to make sure that we were all pushing ourselves to think very widely about this moment in time that we are in, and about the ways in which folks are handling artificial intelligence. And Dr. Butler was just, is one of those folks where, like, when he spoke, we listened. And not because he was requiring that of us in a kind of cocky way or in a way of deference, but just it was clear that this work was not new work for him, and that he was approaching this work from varying different lanes and different lenses and different spectrums. So I want to more formally introduce him by his bio, but I remember in that moment, I came back to Union and I was like, oh my goodness, I hope we have an opportunity to work with him in some way, because I really want our audience to be exposed to his scholarship. And so this speaker series is a year in the making, and hopefully it's the beginning of even more work together. But Philip Butler is an international scholar whose work primarily focuses on the intersections of, listen to this, neuroscience, technology, spirituality, and Blackness. Wow. Philip uses the wisdom of these spaces to engage in critical and constructive analysis on Black posthumanism, artificial intelligence, and pluriversal future realities. He is also the founder of the Seeker Project, a distinctly Black conversational artificial intelligence with mental health capacities. Philip has theorized artificial cognitive architectures for synthetic evolving life forms, self, presented on emotionally regulating and spiritual experience, introducing brain-computer interfaces, and has constructed blockchain protocols and conceptual logistics infrastructures for a world leader in the industrial hemp space. Dr. Butler, is the director of Iliff's AI Institute, which works to change how computers see people, relate to culturally iterative languages, and build the bones for a data ownership model that hopefully creates a relational framework for the way AI is made around the globe. He is the author of Black Transhuman Liberation Theology, Spirituality and Technology, and most recently, the editor of Critical Black Futures, Speculative Theories and Explorations. He has published in journals such as The Black Scholar, the Journal of Posthuman Studies, and the Journal of Future Studies. He is currently working on his second monograph, Still Black Posthuman, A Theory of Uncertainty and Disorder. And so with the wealth of knowledge, we could be here for hours, but we have chosen to talk today about the sustainability of AI. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Gabby Cudjoe Wilkes. I am the director of the Technology, Innovation, and Digital Engagement Lab Fellowship and Programs here at Union Theological Seminary. And we have dedicated for the past 2.5 years, really holding space and conversation around innovation, around the ways in which those who lead in a faith-based lane can really be on top of the current moment of innovation and can think about ways that are sustainable to innovate using technology that benefits not only your organization, but also organizations to come. So our audience is usually folks who are either in seminaries, divinity schools, nonprofit organizations, congregational leaders, and beyond. Folks who are looking to share information, share wisdom, share tools, and also share experiences. So would you please just give me an emoticon and welcome Dr. Philip Butler to the TIDEL Speaker Series. We are so thrilled to have you. Dr. Butler, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm sitting there thinking I need to shorten my bio. It's like,
Well, sometimes it's important to do the breadth of the bio. It really helps people to know how they can engage you. So
Fair
We're
enough.
not mad at the link.
Fair enough. And I appreciate. I'm glad to be here. And so I'm excited to be in conversation with you today.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for your yes. Well, let's hop right in. And by way of housekeeping, folks, the two of us will have a conversation, and then we will intentionally leave space for Q&A. So if you have a really great question and you feel like you can't hold it until the end, just drop it in the chat. We'll come back to it. Or you can wait until our Q&A portion of the talk. All right, so let's get into it. Artificial intelligence, AI. Um, it is, I believe, the conversation of our time. It is not necessarily a new occurrence, but it is one that I think has iterated to the point where it is in households and in conversations and in the headspace of the everyday person who doesn't consider themselves a techie. And when you get to the point where any technology is in people's regular conversation, beyond folks who deem themselves as techies, I find that you then move to this place of anxiety, frustration, concern of, oh my goodness, now that this thing is here and I as a regular person have to engage it, how do I do it? Right. And so I would argue that the past couple of years have been a lot of people asking how questions about AI, a lot of people getting really caught up very quickly about what AI is, how beneficial or harmful it might be. Are they being left behind if they don't engage it? Are they engaging it too quickly? And so I'd love to just kind of start off just grounding us in those kind of brass tacks of that level of conversation. Could you give us a sense of how you and all of your scholarship and background, how do you talk about AI? When someone's at your dinner table at Thanksgiving or, you run into somebody at a happy hour, how do you talk about artificial intelligence? Do you talk about it as good, as bad, as neutral, here to stay, a fad? Like, what is your kind of framework for artificial intelligence and how folks should be engaging it in this moment?
Yeah, I think the good bad is it's always interesting. In many ways I just see AI as pervasive. And so, regardless of where you find yourself on any particular spectrum of like receptivity or resistance, um, even if you try to get off the grid, in many ways, right, you're gonna have a difficult time avoiding it. And I talk about that primarily from this perspective that, like, beyond whatever compute power you have or whatever, agent you may be engaging with, in your everyday. The fact that these data centers are popping up at the rate that they are, and the ways that these data centers are impacting our environment, whether it be through right air quality or right through water consumption, or just other modes of just energy consumption, right? Being off the grid, you still be affected by it, similar to anybody who would be, affected by like or who be downwind from like say Canadian fires or California fires or even here in Colorado, right? The fires in like Estes Park, if you catch those during the middle of the summer, you're gonna be downwind, and you'll see whether it be different forms of smoke, or let alone just, having to recognize that you're sharing resources with the people either, in the same community or depending upon where you are, right, the kind of water sharing rights. And so when I talk about AI, I'm really just talking about it as kind of this part of this larger kind of social technical ecosystem whereby you either are, in relationship with it directly, right? It's kind of this an end user, right? The developer of sorts, right? Or you are kind of impacted by it in this larger kind of indirect fashion, whether you want to be engaged with it fully or not, just simply by the fact that it's, kind of this thing that seems to be supported through, right, the construction of more and more apparatus that, is meant to support its proliferation, right? So again, I think when I talk about it, it's pervasive. And so the question that I kind of also kind of put towards people is really just one of like, uh, how do you choose to engage it, right? And where maybe are your places of contention, or where do you start, given just, your own orientation, as you think about the topic.
Yeah. When you talk about, so that's really helpful. So it is pervasive. It depends on how you engage it, but then you talked a little bit just now about this kind of moral understanding of it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Now, and I say this question, I'm laughing because um, my Black posthumanist framing, right, has a very kind of interesting spin on morality. And
Okay.
so when you're talking about morality, just want to be clear, how are you framing it in this moment?
Well, I was reacting to your definition, so I want to actually frame it. I want to frame it how you frame it, and this is not me running from the question. This is me actually wanting to know how you approach, because I think it's helpful to ground our audience in your relationship to AI, because you've been doing this work for so long. I mean, even to the point of training, right? So I'm just interested in your definition, really, to ground us in how we talk about it going forward.
Yeah, nah, for sure. And so, I mean, there's no, I guess if you wanted to place value props on it, right? I think you're going to be talking about really maybe the toll of the environment. And like, just because you as an individual may choose not to interact with it, it does not necessarily stop, right, these machines from running, regardless of where they are. And so, the notion of being, quote unquote, better or a good person simply because you've chosen a specific proximity to it does not necessarily make it good. And so when we talk about, I know you mentioned a little bit about being left behind, right? And so this also kind of speaks a little bit, and maybe squarely to, right, the notion of like cognitive decline for some folks, right? So MIT came out with the study maybe a couple months back. It was over the summer. And it was basically like your brain on ChatGPT. And so when we talk about like a good amount of the more popular generative models, right? The fact that people are kind of punching in their needs and not necessarily like doing the work at the same level of engagement that they used to, we're seeing people's skills begin to kind of diminish a bit, which I think is particularly important for me, given like the work that we do with Seeker is, I think it's important. It's an introspective machine. And what is that? Primarily, it means that like when you like, I have a question or you try to give it a prompt, but at the end of the day, because it's centering your experience, it's going to continue to ask you questions about yourself, which is going to engage your cognitive qualities and kind of make you think about what's going on in your own personal life. And so I think this is really like similar to many other tools or technologies. It's going to be a reflection, right, of your own intentionality around it and your choice to your choice to engage in and how your choice impacts, right, your kind of daily practice of engagement with technology or not.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. No. I appreciate that. And let me just also name for the audience. I'm sorry I had to switch devices from my computer to my phone. My computer was glitching a bit. And so if my vantage point is a little bit shifted, that is why. My apologies there.
I couldn't understand.
Okay, look at that. Look at that. Helpful. That is really man, I'm resisting the urge to go down this rabbit hole because now I want to hear more about Seeker. But let me get to the topic at hand, and I might double back to your work with Seeker. But let's talk sustainability, right? That is we had over 100 folks register for this talk, and we centered sustainability in our description. And so my assumption is that folks who are in this room are folks who are really interested in what it looks like to be participants in sustainability. So talk to me a bit about your work and the eco-justice dimension of the impact that artificial intelligence is having literally on our environment, and some of the work you're up to and that you're really leading. And I feel like you're at the forefront in trying to find sustainable ways to engage AI if we are to grant that it's going to be here for some time with us.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think we've actually been starting to think about this maybe like the last kind of like 6 to 9 months. And in doing so, it's mainly like trying to start small because, right, the majority of means or modalities that people are using, right? For instance, like we all recognize that like one inquiry within like a ChatGPT or any kind of AI model is going to be, at least like 16 to 17 ounces of water. So we're talking about like this kind of overt and explicit and like this excessive use, right, of one of our kind of most, I don't say scarce, but most kind of precious resources. Then you talk about again like the formation of these data centers, and if you look at the maps, there are data centers all over the country. If we just want to look at the U.S. context, but I think what is shifting, right, are these kind of super computer data centers where we're talking about acres upon acres, and we're talking about incredibly large amounts of computers, and I think so. Depending upon the size of it, you're talking about like the tank that is meant for like one particular complex is going to be like I think about 30,000 gallons of water, right? And so then you imagine that there's multiple complexes on each kind of site. So we're talking about anywhere rough, especially when we start talking about the ones that like some of these larger companies are beginning to build. And so, anywhere from 30,000 gallons to like maybe 120, 150,000 gallons, they're just held on reserve. Forget about the way that they're being flushed in and out and the way that this is impacting the drinking water, especially the way that these larger data centers are being placed right in kind of these predominantly black communities, whether we talk about Memphis or even the fight that the folks in PG County just wanted to kind of stave off right the production of the data centers that were just made. And so we're thinking about ways of finding kind of more natural elements that would be of better use, right, to keep the computers cool, because that's pretty much the use of water. The use of
Okay.
water is meant to cool down the
Thank you for saying that, because every time people talk about water, it does not compute, and no one ever says what the water is for. And so when you try to have a conversation with somebody that says, be careful about using Chat GPT too much because it's using this amount of water, folks are like, what? Like it just doesn't, perhaps
yeah.
the pun intended, David, but it just doesn't compute. So thank you. Say that again. How the water is used, the
Yeah,
corresponding.
so these computers are held up on racks, and the racks are cooled by a water system. So you got water that flows in and out, and then it kind of flushes through, and then again, not to mention the water that is on reserve. And so, in a nutshell, right, the use of this water is meant to flush to keep the computer systems cool,
Yeah.
because each time each kind of inquiry warms up the GPUs in order for it to get the answers that you're looking for in a nutshell. And so, we're interested in what kind of chemicals could be used as a coolant, and as opposed to water. We're also interested, right, in what can be done as opposed to like the gasoline generators, right? Because a lot of these centers run on gasoline at the moment, and that's probably like if you heard about the hemp folk that I've been kind of working with for the last about 7 8 years, right? We're looking at potential ways to use like hemp gasoline or hemp biofuel, right, as an alternative, right, to diesel and or just other fossil fuels. And so, if you look at some of the Chinese models, just other models across the globe, right, they take their data centers and they stuff them deep in the ocean. And so that way
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to flush them in and out, but nevertheless, right now you have these kind of data centers never leaving water sources. And so again, it's just a matter of trying to figure out what's the best. And so for us at the Institute, right, we pretty much we have two things that are kind of driving us. One is localization. So we're like, what are some of the local ways to make sure these centers sustainable? And then we're also curious about precision technology again. So that requires a bit more data, but I think the localization piece is what's particularly like specific right to the topic at hand.
Okay, so what disciplines, because this feels like this goes far beyond the average faith leader, right? Who just wants to make their mark, do their part, and not decline using a technology that might be beneficial to them in other ways, right? So my question is is this a call out to scientists? This a close out to folks who are working, like our Center for Earth Ethics folks at Union? Like, what's the discipline of folks that can get involved at this level of work that you're in right now, where you're looking for alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is like an interdisciplinary thing, and for those right in the like the history of theology, religious studies, folks, like this is kind of like this is where the rubber hits the road, meaning like this is a call towards secularism in a lot of ways,
A
because
call to our secularism.
yeah, because if what we're doing is we're taking the very things that we've learned within our religious and theological institutions, and now we're trying to apply them to the public square. And so, like when we talk about the humanities and these various institutions at spaces that are not like R1, research spaces, right? We're talking about getting thinkers who have a larger right background in history within the humanities, right, or within the post humanities, or just within the critical thinking spaces to begin to apply right to like some of the more linear like mathematical spaces, right? And so I think this, and so what I'm trying to say is it's going to call for a combination, right, of the
Yeah.
technical realm as well as right the philosophical or the humanistic realm or the post-humanistic realm, because if without this, right, we see folks kind of spinning the wheels like, oh, these are all this is all that the math or the computations are giving us. But then on the back end, it's like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And so people with less technical backgrounds, their gift are the questions that they're willing to ask. And so if you're willing to ask these tough questions, these questions that kind of challenge, right, the not just the authority, right, of the authority of empiricism, right, but challenge, right, the methodology of empirical studies as well as a means, right, to arrive at different ends. And so and so you're asking like which disciplines, I'll say which disciplines can't, and I don't think any discipline cannot. I think everybody has to come to the
Yeah.
table willing to have this conversation.
But I'm hearing you say in particular, this is an opportunity for us to have an interdisciplinary conversation with folks who are in the humanities, folks who are in philosophy, folks who are in mathematics, folks who are in natural sciences, folks who are in environmental sciences.
Yeah.
And that excites me because I think sometimes when we do this work, we turn to basically the lane of ethics. Or we try to put some sort of theological interpretation on our why.
Yeah.
And then we normally end up in this place of good or bad, right? You said not good or bad, pervasive, but we end up in this place of like, this is good, this is bad. We will use it or we won't use it. It's iterating too quickly, so we can't affect it. Or we're always playing catch up, trying to catch a trend that's already, by the time it gets to the local faith-based community, it's 5 years later from when it was at its point of inception. So what I appreciate about your framing, you saying ask the questions. One thing faith-based people know how to do is ask some questions. Okay, if you have a theological education and background, you have been trained to ask questions. And oftentimes when it comes to the work of technology and innovation, it feels like we don't have any tools available to us that allow us to start this work. And so I would definitely say to those who are in the audience with us today, Dr. Butler is saying start with your questions, and being that kind of that adjutant in a way that says, well, you know, if we can't get at it from this perspective, right? If something has to cool the computers, right? If something has to manage how we get this work done at a high level, what else can be used, right? You're talking about hemp, you're talking about all these other gasoline, I think you said. What else can be done? And maybe we as the faith leaders are not the ones who know what the substitute is. Maybe we're just the ones that know that a substitute must be found.
Yeah.
Right. And that gives me hope that maybe we're the ones who can say, well, if we know that this form of technology is not leaving, here's what is on us to lock arms with folks across disciplines and really ask them to center their research on what humanity needs, not only in our pursuit of just the next great, you know, technological innovation, but also like what we need sustainability wise in this other moment. How does your field of post-human artificial intelligence frame how you approach this work? And I'm going to back up a bit. Can you explain what it means for you to be a professor of post-human artificial intelligence?
Sure. So I've been dealing with posthumanism for about 8 years now. It was actually the final chapter in my dissertation that that got knocked out because it was about transhumanism. And so like I tried to take a cone approach and like finish the work in 4 chapters and start something new in 5. But they was like, if you want to graduate, you're gonna get rid of this chapter.
You
So
said a cone approach? Did you say a cone approach?
I
As in
did,
James
I
Cone?
did, I
Come on,
did.
shout out to Union Theological Seminary.
Yeah,
Okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
you already know. And so,
Yep,
and
yep.
so, and so for me, like posthumanism, like starts with like the decentering of human or the man, right? Kind of using like Sylvia Wynter's terminology or framing. But I think even more so, right? I've been critical of the discourse as it was presented to me, primarily because of the ways that it still upholds certain modes of like stratification through, you know, the concept of humanity. So for me, humans don't exist. It's a technology of a proximity to power and empire. But all that to say, like from a black.
Hold up. Now I'm gonna call you Philip. Now, hold up, Philip.
Whoa.
You. That was a big statement. You got to give it to us in baby steps. You said
My-
humans don't exist. Say
I
it
don't
again.
think so.
Okay,
Yeah,
so break that down for me.
So in my first text in Black Transhumanism, right, I make the argument that in a world that is attempting to move towards liberation, if they're asking you to give up your blackness and maintain your humanity, then it becomes a problem because which human are we trying to proliferate? And so, in this sense, when we talk about humanity, I at one point I thought humanity was a cybernetic technology of white supremacy, meaning like we have to replicate whiteness in its normalities.
Right.
But as I've gone along in the last few years, for me, it's like if you go back and you go go through like Rousseau and you go through the Greeks and the medieval folks, you end up back in Egypt because that's where a lot of folks studied. But then if you look at the papyri, where you'll see, right? I think there are folks who say that like the Egyptians consider themselves to be the only humans. And so, right, if you can map things all the way back and see that primarily like the human notion was a reflection of those in power or those who were,
Mm,
being able to give no, be able to grant citizenship, to grant rights. And so not only is it, I mean, you could argue that in this sense, white folks didn't come up with humanity. Humanity is the product of empire and and your ability to be close to those who are in power. Uh,
humanity is the product of empire and one's ability to be close to power. And
yes.
that's why you say you don't believe in.
Humans,
Okay,
I don't
okay,
think humans exist. Yeah, I mean, like,
okay,
and I know folks will be like, it's semantics or whatever, but I would be closer leaning to like personhood or people, because for me, I ground people in personhood within localized spaces. So like a person is a local and complex being, right? That
okay,
is tied to the ground, that is tied to its ancestors, right? It's tied to these things, and it allows for complexity and granularity and identity and being in ways that humanity doesn't. Because not only would I argue that humans don't exist, but humans are like this universal construct in which people either fit within or are attempting to make, like it's almost like this goal that people are striving towards and
okay,
hoping that they be included within.
okay. So humanity for you does not exist, but people and personhood does.
Sure.
And humanity is more connected to power and empire. People
Hmm.
and personhood is connected to localities.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So let's keep going. You're talking about what it means to be a post-human artificial
Yeah.
intelligence professor and scholar.
And so, like, this is part of the reason why I say it's an invitation to the folks in the humanities, right? You say to ask the question, and I know, like, we come from traditions of criticality, and right, and saying what is wrong or what's missing in arguments. But I also want to remind people, like, of the invitation of curiosity, right? Like, I think that is a precursor to wonder. And so, like, curiosity about like what elements could be, have not been found, or what elements could be used to cool the water, for an example, right? I think the curiosity has a bit more a bit more room for blossoming, even though I think the critical notion is important for deconstructing and kind of finding out what's really there. But all that to say, for me, if the human is not at the center, then we're looking at, right, the whether it be like a hemp plant or the atoms or the local rocks versus like, in one area versus the next, they have the same level of importance as us, and it requires a different relationship. And so Black post humanity is also a relational thing. It looks at kind of I guess the constellation of being from a different perspective, and so as a result, you come with different answers. And so from a technological perspective, what we're really getting at is that we cannot continue to reproduce anthropological modes of exceptionalism, and if
Ah,
you don't do that, then you arrive at different conclusions, and your questions are different. And now you can actually look at being, quote unquote, sustainable, or just having. It makes sense to arrive at a different conclusion because you're not starting with the same blocks.
okay. Is anybody else glad this is being recorded so we can go back and I mean this is so good. This is exactly how I felt when we were in DC together, Philip. I'm just like, I need 3 hours with you so I can ask every question. I love this. And so yeah, I love your framework and also like how we get to anthropology. So in that sense, where does artificial intelligence show up once you're committed to doing this post-human work?
Sure. I mean, so like, there are some folks within like the technical field that would call it like dangerous to say that these things are alive. And whether you think they are or not, like I don't think it's neither here nor there. But I think in many cases, like for me, if I was to kind of follow the trajectory of some sorts, like I think so. I have like this panpsychic animism that I talked about before, but all this really suggests is that any and everything, right? You know, has you can say soul, or it's alive. And I say this mainly because like even the inanimate objects we have, if you go down small enough and at different levels of scale, you'll see that the atoms and the particles are moving. And for me, if something's moving, then it has a level of either intentionality or desire. And so, whether it's aware of it, we definitely wouldn't be because we're not atoms or particles. But if it's movement there, then you could argue that intentionality precedes or is the result of intellect, and intellect suggests a level of sentience. And so, you know, we can talk
Ooh.
about these
So we're
different
saying AI
AI.
beings might not be inanimate. They might be moving. They might have a soul.
Yeah,
We're
listen,
saying it's possible based on how we define. Okay. Okay.
yeah. I mean, in this next book, I say that we have multiple souls, but we're not here to talk about that.
Okay. Okay. I think we got to bring him back. Okay. All right. I
Yeah.
love it. So, and it's interesting because I was at South by Southwest last spring on
Okay.
behalf of Union and TIDEL, and
Yeah.
we were having these conversations about um, generative AI and at what point is AI a being that does have some degree of personhood to a certain extent, and as a result of that, what do we owe it, right? And like as you know, as folks are using almost like animal skin to kind of put on AI, you know, things that make it feel more real and have it kind of walk with you. And corporations who have no connection to faith-based conversation, no connection to corporate social responsibility, no connection to ethics, we're also asking the question of
Yeah.
like, what do we owe this thing if we iterate so quickly that that we see it as a being and a part of society? You know, R2D2, if it makes it easier to kind of go back into like a world that we thought was only, you know, in our dreams of when these kind of artificial beings do they have personhood? And then when it comes to the faith-based conversation, then it's like, well, then if they have souls, are we invested in this kind of religious conversation about, you know? So it's so interesting the ways in which I find it fascinating that even folks who are not necessarily on paper committed to interreligious dialogue and ethics are still having these conversations right now at the level of artificial intelligence. And I'm curious, I mean, you're in Denver. Typically, I would argue that the West Coast is usually out ahead. Or maybe you all are considered Mountain Standard Time, but so I would consider that part of our nation is typically further down the pipeline of what's possible before it gets to the East Coast. That's no shade to the East Coast. I'm a proud New Yorker. But I mean, I know the first time I saw a self-driving Waymo car was when I was in Seattle. And that still hasn't made its way to New York, right? So I'm interested, like, you travel a lot. Do you find these conversations happening at different levels based on where you are in the nation? Like, are there different conversations happening in Denver and California and, you know, the like?
I think so. And I think a lot of folks are, you know, maybe not grounded in their like local politics and like in a normal sense, but I think in many ways it's a reflection of that, right? Like, so I just got, it may not be a US context, but I just got back from Dakar a little bit over a month ago. And what we ended up discussing was like the potential of like, you know, because with the end of USAID and right the I guess like the I guess metropolization right of the continent in many ways where folks are moving towards a city and also looking for more jobs, and then you think about the ways of like where innovation happens differently on the continent and all because they're solving different problems. But I say all that to say we were having conversation about like again these kind of sustainable data centers versus like what we do here. But I think it's harder to talk about it for me, I think, in some ways in the States because people are convening in different places, if that makes sense. Like we may be in LA, but it's people from all across the country. And so these are like happening at certain sites, but it's still people from across the country who are having different conversations. But I think in terms of like building things, yeah, you'll find that folks are at different thought processes about what needs to be built. And because I think, you know, in the South and East Coast, I think folks really care about archiving. And then folks on the West Coast, right, they're thinking about iterating and they're thinking about building systems and structures. And so I think in a lot of ways, you're finding, right, maybe some space in the middle because even like right now, we're thinking about what it means to archive genealogical spaces. For example, right? Like for me, I know I want to take my grandmother's voice and I want to take some of her thoughts and idioms and I want to add that to a model. And so you kind of immortalize her in this way. You immortalize her wisdoms, you immortalize her idiosyncrasies, you immortalize like her tone, things along that nature. So in this sense, it's a combination of the structuralization on the West versus like forms of archiving that you might see in the South and the East.
Mm. We're turning to questions in 5 minutes, and I see raised questions, so his will be the first.
Okay.
But if you all want to get your questions ready, we'll be in that mode in about 5 minutes. I want to give my last question to you, Dr. Butler,
Sure.
about you mentioned these kind of sustainable data centers. You've mentioned finding alternative ways to kind of cool these computers and keep the tech going. You've mentioned the importance of questions. I'm interested in, are there things that leaders of faith-based institutions should be considering when we're thinking sustainability and long-term AI use? And not to force you into a binary, but I'm curious, are there any best practices that you would offer to those who are faith leaders where folks are asking like, how much is too much in terms of use of AI? You know, am I being a good steward of the environment by stumbling across AI tools that make my life easier? Like, what are some of the like ways in which you might speak to this room of folks who I would argue if they're in this conversation, they probably see some value of AI and probably use it in some way, but also are probably very aware of the other implications of it and are interested in giving good guidance to folks who come to them.
Nah, for sure. So I think the first, even your question made me think of two things. The first was how they used to build old cathedrals, where they knew like they would build plants that became trees that would become the wood for like the arches and stuff like that. And then on the back end, I'm thinking about like how the native folks out here talk about like the seventh generation. So you need to think about 7 generations behind you and the 7 generations ahead of you. And so for faith leaders today, right? I think it's important to imagine the future. And so this is kind of where the curiosity comes in. These are where the questions come to the surface because if you have an image or a concept of what you think the future is going to look like in 7 generations that honors and respects the folks who came before, then I think in a very real way, you'll build in what it means to be sustainable. You'll build in what it means to make sure, right, that you're considering not only what's important for, fast iterations in our present moment, but what it's going to take to be able to still iterate quickly, right, in the next 100, 200 years. As well as like being able to put people in place to make sure that these communities are able to thrive long beyond right our lifetimes. And so I don't think it's like an overart. I don't think it's like a very specific thing because I'm thinking
Yeah.
each community is going to have their own ideas about what the future is going to be, and I think that that's something where agency, right, is super important because it's these communities belong to certain groups of people, and I think those groups of people ought to be the ones who have the final say, and so I think this is a series of conversations, to say the least, whereby folks are imagining not only where they want to be, but they're bringing in people who can help influence and inform what that formation of those ideas will be.
Yeah, that's great. Are there places, or is there a way that folks can look up to see where these data centers are? You mentioned that some of the data centers are being placed in impoverished communities or urban areas, but my guess is that if folks from this conversation are willing to take on the mantle of asking questions and looking for alternatives, it might be helpful for them to have a starting point. And so is there a website or a place that says this is where the data centers currently are, that folks can target and respond to?
Yes.
Yeah, how do you source that information?
No, that's a great question. I actually need to pull up the website, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But yeah, no, there are definitely. I think it was a data center frontier. Let me see if this is it. No, but by the time we get up off here, hopefully I'll be able to drop the
Okay.
link. There's
And we
plenty.
have everyone in this room has registered. So we're also able to send links after the fact. So that's just a tool that I'd love for folks to have. Let's kick it to questions. So we have a question already in the chat from both Ray and Valerie. Ray, would you like to unmute and advance your question?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, thank you again so much for this very informative talk. So the reason I asked this question is that it seems to me that there's a really big push to for us to use AI, and like you said, no one's really talking about the environmental impact, and it seems to me that most recently here in St. Louis, a data center was the plants were shut down because they did not have appropriate approval from the neighborhood to build it. And so, of course, there's the trade-off there with data job, the job centers and all of that. But like, I think, how do you see this, Dr. Butler?
How do, just for clarification, how do I see which part of it?
Just, it seems to me that there's a through line from the 1800s of having these kind of technologies, right? And with this really big impact in the environment, and yet, and it seems like these are today's version of those dirty factories.
Are you talking about like industrial revolution type factories?
Yes, back in the 1800s, yes.
Okay. All right. No, for sure. And so, I mean, I think this is kind of a continuation of the enlightenment's version of progress, right? And so, like, progress in any means, which includes the environment, it includes communities, it includes people's lives. And so, to me, this really isn't anything new. But I think what's important, if right, and so. I think one of the reasons why I'm big on the future is because I don't want to be handed somebody else's imagination for the future. I don't want to step into somebody else's dream. And so what I mean by that is like, so if we recognize this is another iteration of the industrial, textile based kind of complex, but it's done so in terms of data and information, then again, this is part of the reason why like we're trying to imagine what does it mean to make a better data center. What does it mean to step into this kind of ecosystem and make it better? 'Cause I mean, unless we're gonna find ways, right, that are gonna be alternative forms of power, right? And I'm not saying like the nuclear fusion or kind of quantum based energies are right around the corner. But unless you're gonna have that type of impact now, then the question is gonna be, well, what can we do at this particular moment as an intervention? And so, whether the intervention, is, arguing for regulated use of, AI, where like there are time limits on everybody's stuff for each day, or, kind of thinking, squarely with like different legislators and what this type looks like. There are gonna be this. It's gonna require us, and by us, I just mean everybody, right, to kind of take ownership of this kind of moment and kind of insert themselves into the larger conversation on purpose, even at the expense of being wrong. And that's part of the reason why the high emphasis on questions and curiosity, because in the beginning there's a lot of room for error.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Valerie. Valerie, if you would like, you can unmute and advance your question, please.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I have to say, this all is really mind-blowing, so I'm trying to wrap my head around it. But when we think about who is benefiting from AI right now, they are people who are driving towards profit and power, and they have inordinate power without a whole lot of consideration for the larger humanity or larger peoplehood, whatever the appropriate term is. And I wonder, from a faith standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, is there a way to bend that and influence that? Because the gap between the haves and have-nots, or that very minuscule percentage of the haves, is only getting bigger and bigger. And is there a way that you see where the intention and the benefit and the motivation for AI is not solely limited to profit and power and those outcomes? And how do we see it in a different, broader, more beneficial way? because those are the folks who are holding all the power, and that's why they're making decisions without regard to who's being impacted by this. So,
Yeah.
does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, it does. And I think that is an important and difficult question. And I say that mainly because, right, the race for these data centers is squarely one about power, because the more computational power you have, like very literally and very figuratively, the more computational power you have, the more capacity you have to put things in the cloud, the faster your computers will work, right? The quote unquote better, which we know this is not necessarily the case, right? Like there's a cutoff of when your models, kind of stop being efficient or even really good. And but nevertheless, like the the understanding underneath this is that in order to serve everyone, right, you have to have the most amount of compute. And but in order to serve everyone, you also need to be able to charge everyone. And so this is kind of where these things are very much so tied together. But I think, and this is also part of the reason why is recognition that, like, some these larger companies are not unaware of more sustainable ability or capacities, right, to or even technologies to use. This is a choice, right? Because some of these technologies that are more sustainable are also experimental, but we know that you can rely on a gas-based generator to do stuff. But then what happens when you have like 100 of them lined up right next to each other? Like this is when, things start to compound. And so it's really just a matter of like efficiency for the sake of capitalism, which again, it reiterates like this larger, kind of stratification of society. And so if you're talking about what it means to maybe provide like a counter technological approach to this kind of boom, then that is something that is gonna kind of be bootstrapped of sorts by the folks who really care enough to do it. But that also is going to require a significant amount of buy-in from community, because somebody's got to use what you make in order for it to be a shift in behaviors.
Thank you. We have time for another question. If there's someone who would like to advance a question, feel free to unmute, introduce yourself, and go for it.
I guess I'll go for it.
Go ahead, Maggie, welcome.
So, I mean, one thing that I'm particularly interested in is
Maggie, can you introduce yourself really quickly?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Mhm.
Hi, I'm Maggie. I'm the managing director at the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary.
Hey,
So glad
okay.
to be here with you tonight. Really great, thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And we've been talking about AI a bit
Yeah.
internally, of course, like everyone. And I guess one thing I come more from environmental science, policy background myself. And one thing I'm really struck by is that environmental science researchers are wholeheartedly embracing AI to improve their forecasting models, their ability to predict the future. In many ways, that's great, of course, right? The ability to synthesize large data sets. And yet, I was just on a webinar this week about drought in New York State and talking with a researcher about it. And, there was this disconnect about using AI to help program the models and then what it does for drought, scenarios. So I'm just kind of curious if you have any reflections on that, Dr. Butler, really as like maybe a first audience to sort of engage in these conversations about really the pros and cons, the conflicts, the hypocrisy even of using AI for some of this environmental science research.
Yeah, it's I think the scientific kind of space for AI is an interesting one, because you find, right, these kind of dualities as you just described. And then you'll go to like, the protein sciences, right, or the genetic sciences, and they're coming up with new proteins, new models for DNA construction, like all different. And so like I'm saying all this to suggest that it is wrought with like potholes, as well as like inconsistencies that seem to almost kind of spell out what's more important. Like, if we're going to keep, doing this thing to the environment to predict things, are there better ways to predict without the use of these models? And again, kind of thinking about like, do we put use limits on these models in order for there to be a cap, right, and in the devastation piece? And again, not to go back to like a particular binary, but again, like if you're not making significant amount of progress, then should you be using this much, right, of this particular tool? But I think overall, like you're kind of gonna probably find yourself stuck in between the space of the folks who are willingly disconnected from the consequences because I think that they see the ability to do things that they could not do previously as outweighing the impacts on the environment, primarily because they're not going to be the immediate recipients of its impact, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't. It's not a. I don't think it. I don't think it's the most fanciest answer. I wish I had a better one, but it's just kind of like, you know what, at this point they're almost addicted to the use of this thing that just kind of continues to punch out different outcomes given the different variables. Yeah.
And Maggie,
Thank
just
you.
because we have you, would you like to speak to some of the work that you all are doing at Union? Because I think it's just so aligned. It's wonderful to have you here.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, so we're a program of Union Theological Seminary. We kind of sit at that crossroads between science and ethics and spirituality, and, you know, really working to kind of ground conversations and the climate crisis in these conversations around ethics and morality and deeper issues. So to kind of, you know, to sort of get at the issue of like, we really know what's happening, right? The science is there. I mean, in some ways, the technology to even address the issue is there, and yet we're not doing these things to fix the problem. And so why? Why is that? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. No, thank you so much. Well, I hate to bring us to a close, but we are there. The clock says we are there. But let me ask you, Dr. Butler, you talked about this approach to your work of looking, I think you said it best, looking 7 generations behind and 7 generations ahead when doing work. And so I'm curious, when you look 7 generations ahead, it's kind of our closing thought bubble here. Do you think that the use of artificial intelligence is going to be something that 7 generations ahead, we are going to be grateful we engaged, grateful we figured out how to make sustainable? Or do you see it, you think, as you kind of future, do you see it as something that 7 generations ahead will critique or be frustrated with us about how we engaged it?
Well, if they're looking squarely at the year 2025, they're probably gonna be mad at us anyways. And so,
Fair, fair.
so there's that piece. But I think in many ways, the answer to that is yet to be seen. And I say that because we have not brought the quantum aspect of this conversation online yet. And I think that's going to be a major kind of fork in the road for us. And so if you bring these quantum computers online in a mass way and combine them with these models, there are many who argue that will be like the beginning of like the AGI phase of, you know, the singularity. But then you have to raise the question again, what is the cost, right? What is the environmental cost, right? What is the mental cost, right, of regular people? Like we haven't even talked about the, you know, the neurological impact and the ways that our children are being, you know, affected by these tools, let alone just the proliferation of the, you know, the devices that they're kind of being bombarded with on a regular basis. And so I started to suggest, I honestly think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a huge indicator of what those folks 7 generations ahead of us are going to be able to judge us by.
Got it. Well, thank you so much. This conversation has been so rich. It's helped us to advance and move forward. How we think about getting this work done. If AI is here to stay, which it seems like it is for a little while, I would make sure that we are doing our part to make it more sustainable than it currently is. So thank you to all of you who have joined us. We appreciate your presence. I've dropped a few things in the chat. First of all, Dr. Butler has dropped the link to data centers. So if you want to look and see if there's a data center in close proximity to you, now's a great time to do that and take it back to your home organizations. And maybe you all can be some of those question askers, some of those agitators, some of those folks talking about what are the alternatives and possibilities. Maybe you're like Ray, where your community has already said, we don't want a data center. Perhaps your community is already very engaged and very aware of what they do and don't want in their community. or perhaps you can be an ally to another community who has a data center in their midst. I've also dropped 2 additional links. One is incredibly exciting. 2 weeks ago, TIDEL and Union partnered with EdTech Week in New York City, and we launched our very first digital network powered by Mighty Networks. It's an opportunity for folks who are committed to this work of innovation, technology, and trying to do this work through the lens of being faith leaders. It's a place where we can all connect. And it's also become a place that's starting to slowly expand, where folks who even aren't doing precise work as faith leaders, but who are interested in what faith leaders have to say about this moment, are also finding community. And so I've dropped that link. You are welcome to click the link and join. There's no cost. There's just a few questions where we ask a bit about you, because we do want to make sure that we're intentional about who's in the space. So please make history with us by joining that brand new space. That link is in the chat. And then lastly, I have a link in the chat to all of our speaker series conversations for this semester. And so our talk with Dr. Butler was our second talk of the semester. Our next talk is next month, November 13th. It's at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so it's a lunchtime conversation, and we'll be with Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. We'll be talking about the intersection of social justice and digital engagement. Dr. Theo-Harris has a new book entitled We Pray Freedom. She is the founding director of the Kairos Center, and she is also I don't know if it's the co-founder, but certainly the co-leader of the Poor People's Campaign with Dr. William Barber. And so we're excited to have her. She is deeply connected to Union Theological Seminary, but she will be in conversation with us next month. And then we'll close out the semester with a conversation on interactive design and engagement, creating stronger digital communities with Bethany Stoll of Stoll Creative. Bethany's based out in Seattle and has been a great gift to TIDEL. She has come and worked with our fellows a few times, and that'll be in December. So please continue journeying with us. Thank you for your time this evening. And again, thank you, Dr. Butler. Have a great evening.
You too. Thanks so much. Really appreciate that time. All right, everybody.